Hello and welcome. My name is Juliette Saly. I am a reporter and presenter with Bloomberg Radio and Television based here in Singapore. Delighted to welcome you today to our panel called Catalysing Asia's Low Carbon Economy. And with me today to discuss is Wai-Shin Chan, Global Head of Climate Change Centre and ESG Research at HSBC based in Hong Kong. And we also have Thi Thu Thuy, Global CEO of VinFast. We did see the COP26 summit conclude in Glasgow with a watered-down pledge, this after lobbying from India and China, and that could put Southeast Asia in severe existential danger as one of the world's most vulnerable regions to climate change. Now, of course, we are also seeing this devastating humanitarian crisis unfold in Ukraine. We have seen a surge in commodities driven by that war, crude pushing higher, and we saw the US saying that it will ban the import of Russian crude. I want to discuss all the implications of this, what we're seeing in the metals market, potential further reliance on fossil fuels, and of course what Southeast Asia can do to try and move further towards climate adaptation. Thuy, let's start with you because we did see these extraordinary moves in nickel Tuesday. We know the LME has now suspended those trades, reversed them, but we saw that 250% gain. That is going to add a lot of concerns about the cost of producing EV vehicles. Morgan Stanley saying something it could be like $1,000 extra to produce an EV vehicle. Your thoughts in this extraordinary moves we've been seeing in commodities and how it is possible for a company like yours to meet EV demand in this environment?
Thank you. We are also watching the current market, and obviously there are a lot of challenges right now, but we are sticking to our plan and to start delivering EVs to the international market this year, specifically in the US, EU, and Canada. And we already started delivering EVs in Vietnam. So we just are marching forward with the plan for this year.
You're not concerned about levels of these commodities making it viable and I guess making a consumer decide that perhaps it's too expensive for them to move into EVs?
I think like we are facing the supply chain challenges like everybody else, but I think for this year we should be okay. I think we've been looking at this for the last few weeks, right? It could be an interesting time for EVs because with the gasoline price going up, like the gasoline price being like over $6 per gallon in California, and it's pretty high elsewhere. It's a good opportunity for us because the way that because it becomes cheaper to own an EV. So I think it's a good point for EVs to penetrate the market, and I think it's an opportunity for us.
All right, a silver lining in the cloud as we see people potentially switch to renewables. Wai-Shin, I wanted to get your thoughts too, particularly on this surge in commodities, the concern about a further reliance on fossil fuels, and what you think can be done to try to adapt here, and I guess some of the options we have and some of the cost challenges too.
Well, certainly things have changed from the way people envisaged 2022 to be. That is for sure. One of the main aims for 2022 from a climate change perspective was to sort of revisit and strengthen their climate pledges for countries and companies to do that. And that was happening all the way. And now we're seeing some changes because people are having to rethink their fuel sources, rethink their energy, and rethink the way they do those plans. So the EU has just come out with a sort of renewed plan for renewables and diversifying their energy sources. So I think there will be a lot more rethinking in boardrooms around the world.
How vulnerable do you think Southeast Asian countries are to climate change risks, and I guess how you could see countries and I guess companies too try to adapt here?
The IPCC put out their report on the last day in February, and so that highlights the urgency of climate change, and definitely tells us about the impacts that are available for the Southeast Asian region. Now, if we look at some of the risks that are apparent that came out of the IPCC report, that's very, very interesting because it shows that there are a whole bunch of different types of risks, but those specifically lying to low-lying coastal systems, so natural coastal coastal protection, habitats, disruption of transportation, loss of lives and livelihood, terrestrial marine ecosystems, loss of biodiversity, and then city and crucial infrastructure and how that works across networks. That all applies to Southeast Asia if we think about the coastal communities that we have, the way that the transportation systems work in terms of coastal areas. That is something that Southeast Asian nations really need to be prepared for. And they're doing that by making changes to not just their climate plans, but also the way they are trying to adapt their financial systems and various economic systems. We saw in the budget in Singapore in February that they're making changes to their carbon taxes in the coming years as well, and then announced quite recently as well they're hoping to revisit and strengthen their own climate pledges by the end of this year, looking forward to mid-century. So they are making changes to the risks that are not going to go away, and regardless of what happens around the world, these risks will probably increase when it comes from a climate change point of view.
So just a follow-up on that, are they making changes quickly enough?
That's a good question, Juliette. I don't think any country is making changes quickly enough. Certainly emissions continue to rise. And, you know, as a result of global events this year, I think they will continue to rise. And that is not good enough. The green recovery that we were expecting from the sort of pandemic era, so to speak, where the investments that were made were going to be done with sustainability in mind, that hasn't quite come through. And so what we are seeing now globally is a continuation of these extreme events, the wildfires, the floods, the storms and the droughts, and that will continue to have an effect on food security, and it will also continue to sort of focus the mind on the energy security situation. And so they're not making changes that are quickly enough in order to limit the temperature rises that we're seeing and the emissions that are causing that.
Thuy, if I get back to you, I mean, you know, we have spoken about the EV production, so you are already making inroads there. But tell us what VinFast is doing in terms of hitting climate change and cutting goals, carbon-related goals here. In fact, reliance on carbon.
We are very strongly committed to a sustainable future. So VinFast has established a comprehensive ecosystem of EVs and related services in Vietnam, including e-scooters, electric cars, electric buses, and advanced charging stations in the whole nation. As of February 2022, this year, we have deployed 2,000 charging stations and offering about 40,000 charging ports in 63 cities and provinces in Vietnam, with the capacity to be expanded in the upcoming years. Also, in furthering Vietnam's commitment to sustainable future, we have also announced the plan to cease all the production of internal combustion engine vehicles by the end of the year. This move has made VinFast one of the world's first OEM that switched to fully EV production to develop a sustainable transportation solution for the future. And last but not least, we also have been progressively researching for on application of eco-friendly materials in our production, some of the eco-friendly leather, for example. We're taking drastic measures in reducing wastewater, harmful chemicals, and designing comprehensive strategy for battery production, management, and as well as recycling. And with all those measures, we hope to minimize the negative impacts on the environment and shaping a more sustainable future.
There are risks for not being prepared properly for ESG practices. And I guess when you've just outlined some of the reasons or some of the movements that VinFast is making, what would be some of your top tips for other businesses in Southeast Asia to be prepared here? Because there's also a financial risk if you're not.
Yeah, I think in the last, I would say in the last 2 years or so, ESG is becoming a big focus for all the industry, from businesses like private sector like us to government, and also a lot of investors also very, very focused on ESG. So I think it's going to be happen very soon that if you don't have a very clear ESG in place, then you become like not as friendly to the investor. So we have been preparing for this for the past 2 years or so. We have ESG policy in place. We even have green financing framework in place with the help of HSBC, yeah. And we also issued the first green bond in Asia as well, also with the help with HSBC. And we have been putting in place the ESG policy, as well as have, we have the annual audit of our policy and our compliance as well. So we trying to do our part, but also preparing for the future, because we think that if not being ESG friendly is going to be it's going to take toll on the business.
All right, there's 2 points you touched on there that I want to ask Wai-Shin's thoughts are, and they are, of course, the trends we're seeing in green bonds, issuing finance, but also, of course, the transparency here. We heard from Thuy there about in terms of course, being audited, but what is the transparency for some companies if they're not meeting these goals?
Yeah, that's very, very important, Juliette. If they're not meeting these goals and not being transparent, investors will see that. We're seeing a growing number of regulators around the region and indeed around the world who are asking for sort of stricter standards for not just the disclosures that companies make, but also the disclosures that funds themselves make. And that is interesting because everyone is trying to weed out greenwashing. So this is where companies or investors are pretending to be green when they're not really. And that is not conducive to helping countries and the world meet their climate and sustainability goals. Green bonds are an important way to signal that companies are contributing to that. So where they're ring fencing the use of proceeds for green purposes and green projects. Now, those green projects have to be transparent in the way that they collect information and the way that they execute and implement their sustainability goals within that. So we've seen green bonds around the region grow, and that's an important way of doing financing. But I think investors are also looking to alternative forms of green financing, and that innovation is very, very important to a sort of sustainable future in ASEAN and around the world.
How are companies being held accountable if they are greenwashing?
There are different strategies of doing this. I think if you ask any fund manager, they'll say, well, we could ultimately divest, and that's one way of doing it, very popular a few years ago. But I think the engagement and voting approach is much, much more prevalent these days, where investors actually go to these companies and say, we would like to engage with you. We want you to sort of make better disclosures and tell us how you're doing this climate change strategy, for example, and how you're implementing this. Does it involve oversight from the board? Does it involve a change in business model? How will your visions be actually implemented? And if a company cannot articulate that, then there's an element of greenwashing there. So the onus is on both the investor to actually ask how they're doing it, and for the companies to actually demonstrate how they're doing it with regular reporting and auditing and monitoring and checking, as Madam Thuy said. And that is I think, an ongoing and circular process that needs to be done on behalf of both the general public, but regulators are also pushing for that one as well. So the consequences ultimately would be a tightening of that financing if greenwashing were too prevalent, so to speak.
We're talking about a lot of developing markets too in Southeast Asia. So do you see a lot of Southeast Asia countries and potentially companies too within that falling behind when it comes to the likes of North America and Europe, which are a little bit further ahead with some of the implementation of ESG goals?
I don't think it's a case of falling behind. I think it's a case of starting a little later, but certainly we've seen a lot of markets and indeed companies in the ASEAN, Southeast Asian region move quite quickly. So we think the pace of development is very, very fast. A case in point there is the development of the ASEAN taxonomy. That's come really, really quickly on the heels of the EU taxonomy, and very, very impressively there. And not just ASEAN itself, but for example, individual countries, member states within ASEAN. So Indonesia came out with theirs a few weeks ago as well. We're seeing different regulations come in to sort of tighten this up. So ASEAN again saying that they'd like to sort of have greater scrutiny over the funds that label themselves as ESG. So companies will have to respond to that, because in order to be included in those funds and eventually sort of indices that will come as a part of that, they will have to demonstrate their credentials more structurally and more transparently. Otherwise, the investors, when they make their investment decisions, will say, I don't want this company in because it makes me look bad as a fund manager. I can't apply my own fund label. And so everyone's working together on this. The investors asking the questions, the companies giving the information, and the regulatory processes from above actually making this more transparent and making sense for everyone. So that is a rising tide in the region, not necessarily behind North America and Europe, but certainly moving a lot faster.
All right, you rephrased my question very well. Thank you for saving me there. Madam Chair, I wanted to get back to you as well. I mean, you've talked about some of the opportunities you are seeing. We did talk a little bit about the challenges too with EV batteries at the top, but what other challenges are you seeing, not only in VinFast, but across Vietnam as well, as we do try to adapt here?
You mean the challenges toward sustainable?
Towards meeting sustainable goals, yes.
Yeah, I think in Vietnam it's probably we probably face a lot some unique challenges as well to the market. But I think in general the challenges would be the expenses related to sustainable taking the measures for the sustainable future. But I think we never really look at ourselves as, you know, just a Vietnamese company. We always compare ourselves and want to be one of the international companies. So we've always look beyond our borders and to the top companies in the world and follow the step and do it faster.
And when you compare yourself to those companies, which you rightly are and should, where do you sort of see growth in the EV market in the next 5 years or so, or 5 to 10 years? You mentioned not only cars, scooters and the like. I mean, there's also the consumer that wants to be a lot more thoughtful with the way that they're spending their money as well, and the impact they're having on the environment.
Yeah, I think right now, I think it's the point of no return for the internal combustion engine vehicles. So the world is definitely moving to EVs. It's just a matter of how fast everything moves. I think the rising energy prices actually helped the EV industry, even though some of the OEMs are also having their own challenges. But I think it's good for the industry as a whole. And as we are moving in that direction, I think that EV so far has been a little bit more expensive, both in terms of upfront costs as well. You know, mostly upfront costs, and that's why it hasn't been that popular. So what our approach to EVs is very different from others. We don't choose a niche market or a niche segment. We go for the mass market, and we would like to take the market share from the internal combustion engine vehicles, because that is the trend, and we do that by using exclusively the battery leasing model. And with that, we can bring down the upfront cost of the vehicle significantly. So our VF8 and VF9, the two biggest vehicles that we have, are priced at around $40,000 to $60,000, depending on the model and variant. So, which is like very comparable to the internal combustion engine vehicles. And on top of that, we charge the consumer, like in the US, $110 or $160 per month for the for battery leasing, and we take care of the battery. We repair the battery for free. We replace the battery when it goes down to the 70% capacity, and we take care of the recycling of the battery as well. So basically, we feel like we're being responsible, by taking care of the battery and by providing the consumer with an option to own an EV at reasonable prices, at the cost or even lower cost than owning an internal combustion engine vehicles. And with that approach, we hope that we'll be able to convince more people to switch from internal combustion engine vehicles to EVs. And as of today, I think we announced the early reservation in early January in CES. And today we got about, I think, more than 45,000 early reservation already. So that actually the response from the customers all over the world to our calling, basically.
So in percentage terms, what sort of growth targets are you looking at over the next 5 to 10 years in terms of demand for your vehicles?
We have a 5-year plan that getting us to close to 1 million, or about, obviously depending on the market conditions, but getting around like 750,000, 1 million in the next 5-6 years per year.
All right, Wai-Shin, I wanted to get some of your thoughts too on where we see Southeast Asia in the next 5 to 10 years as we potentially see a further increase to ESG, and focus as well on the S&G and ESG.
Yeah, that's a great question, Juliette. As I said, I think Southeast Asia is moving a lot faster than other places in the world. So the potential sustainable finance boom could be very, very beneficial to Southeast Asia. It could be a hub almost for new technologies to be incubated. It could be a hub potentially for carbon pricing and offsetting. And it could be a hub for sort of financing for other parts of Asia as well. And that is not only beneficial to some of the economies in Southeast Asia, but it's also beneficial to the local communities. In terms of in sort of 5 years' time, we're seeing, as we said earlier, Singapore beginning to sort of raise its carbon taxes, and I think carbon pricing will expand across other parts of the ASEAN economy in Southeast Asia. We're seeing inclinings of this from places like Philippines, Indonesia, and Vietnam as well. So that should be something that I think Southeast Asia really rides upon when it comes to carbon pricing. The benefits will really filter through as we're seeing more sort of investors say this is what we want to be a part of. So the fund flows should benefit the economies in Southeast Asia, as well as maybe the funds move their location there for whatever reason, or whether they move their funds there and invest in the region, and that investment will generate a lot of benefits for the economy. And I think it's going to be a very, very interesting story as the ASEAN member states move towards growing in a more sustainable way. And this could be, I think, at a much quicker pace than we're seeing in other parts of the world. So I'm very, very excited for the prospects for this region.
And it comes at a time when this region has been very much battered by COVID, by border closures, the impact of tourism as well. So could this potentially fuel an economic boom over the next sort of 5 years?
I'm not an economist, so I wouldn't predict any of that. But in terms of sustainability, I think it has a good sort of multiplier effect. It is longer term, though. It's not something that happens over the short term. Sustainable policies coming from regulators and governments take a while to filter through to the economy. But when they do, it tends to have a positive feedback, as you say. So hopefully sustainability will be a part of the boom that the ASEAN member states have in the next few years. And as far as tourism goes, I'd be very much on that bandwagon as well.
Yes, we hope that borders ease there where you are in Hong Kong sometime soon. We're starting to see that here. We're starting to see that in Vietnam too. Madam Thuy, I wanted to get your thoughts on how COVID impacted your company and how you're starting to see a light at the end of this very dark tunnel we've been in.
At Vingroup, we have certain businesses that were impacted by COVID. So we have the largest hospitality entertainment business in Vietnam. So obviously our hotels, resort were heavily impacted by COVID and all the closure in the last 2 years. We have shopping malls that were impacted by COVID as well. And in addition to that, we had to we also felt the responsibility of supporting our tenants. So that that was also another contribution to the tenants. So, but in general, other businesses were not really impacted by COVID as much. We managed to work at full capacity. At some point, we had to go to work from home, but most of the time, I mean, as of now, we pretty much operate at full speed. I think a lot of our employees are impacted by COVID these days, but I think this new variant, Omicron, is quite mild. And we have a hospital, so we take care of our employees and their families. So if there's any serious cases, we take them into the hospital. We take care of them. If it's not, if they are not serious, then we have hotline doctors to talk to them and send medicine and all to them. So we take care of our people, but at the same time, we keep our workforce at full speed as usual.
All right, leading by example. We thank you both very much for your time. Wai-Shin Chan, Global Head of Climate Change Centre and ESG Research at HSBC in Hong Kong, and Thi Thu Thuy, Global CEO at VinFast in Vietnam. I'm Juliette, Saly from Bloomberg. We thank you very much for your time.